Welcome. Before this story begins, take a second and tell us where you're watching from in the comments, your country, your city, anywhere in the world. And if you value stories built on real historical digging and verified records that take countless hours to uncover, make sure you subscribe, because stories like this survive only when truth matters. Tonight's story is one history tried to bury rich twin brothers who believed made them untouchable, an enslaved mother they humiliated without mercy, and the moment, just hours later, when a silent, 7-foot-tall deaf son stepped into their world and changed everything forever. The twin brothers were known across the region for their wealth, cruelty, and unity. Two minds, one will, ruling their land without fear of consequence. When they crossed paths with the enslaved mother, they saw only weakness, only someone they believed could never fight back. What followed was humiliation, meant to break her spirit, carried out publicly, deliberately, and without remorse. But what the brothers didn't know, what no one bothered to tell them, was that this woman had a son who lived on the edges of society, a son who could not hear screams or threats, only vibrations in the ground and the fear in people's eyes, a son whose size alone made grown men step back. 3 hours passed, long enough for the brothers to forget her face, long enough to believe the world had returned to normal. Then the ground began to feel different, footsteps heavier than expected, a presence that didn't announce itself with words. When the deaf giant arrived, there were no threats, no shouting, no warnings, just silence and the kind of fear that comes when you realize too late that power can shift in a single moment. History records what happened next only in fragments, because those who witnessed it rarely spoke again. Some say justice came swiftly. Others say the truth was deliberately erased. But one thing is certain: the twin brothers were never the same after that night, and neither was the land they ruled. Wealth in that era was more than money. It was immunity. The rich twin brothers had grown up watching laws bend in their favor, witnessing how gold could silence witnesses, soften punishments, and erase consequences. From a young age, they learned that cruelty carried no cost as long as it was backed by power. Their plantation was not just land, it was proof that they stood above judgment, above morality, and above fear. Their riches insulated them from empathy. Every comfort they enjoyed was built on forced labor, yet they never saw the people who sustained their lifestyle as human. To them, suffering was background noise, something as natural as the wind through cotton fields. Over time, this belief hardened into habit, and habit turned into pleasure, an indulgence in dominance that required no justification. The twins reinforced each other's worst instincts. Where one hesitated, the other pushed forward. Where one doubted, the other mocked weakness. Together, they created a closed world where cruelty felt normal and mercy felt absurd. In that shared mindset, torment became entertainment, and humiliation became proof of authority. Their wealth also bought silence. Overseers looked away. Neighbors pretended not to see. Even local officials learned to ask fewer questions when the twins were involved. This absence of resistance convinced them that they were untouchable, that their actions existed outside the reach of history itself. Nothing frightened men who had never been challenged. When they encountered the enslaved mother, they did not see an individual, They saw an opportunity. Someone powerless enough to absorb their malice without consequence. The act of tormenting her was not fueled by anger, but by boredom, a casual exercise of dominance meant to remind the world who controlled it. Unchecked cruelty grows bolder with time. Each unpunished act sharpens the appetite for the next. The twins had crossed countless invisible lines before, and nothing had happened. That pattern convinced them that nothing ever would. They believed the past proved the future would remain the same. What they never understood was that wealth can distort reality, but it cannot control it forever. Cruelty ignored has a way of echoing beyond the moment it is committed, and sometimes the reckoning does not come from courts or crowds, but from a place power never thought to look. The twin brothers' power did not come only from wealth, but from the way they operated as a single force. From childhood, they were inseparable, dressed alike, educated alike, taught to believe that together they were unstoppable. Where other men argued with themselves, the twins found confidence in reflection. Each decision was instantly validated by the other, creating a closed loop where doubt could never survive. Their bond magnified authority. Workers, overseers, and even neighboring landowners feared them not as individuals, but as a pair that could not be divided or reasoned with. If one brother issued an order, the other enforced it without question. There was no appeal, no softer side to approach, no rival to play against the other. Power doubled itself through unity. This shared dominance slowly erased accountability. When cruelty occurred, neither brother claimed responsibility alone. Each became the other's justification. If confronted, one would insist it was the other's idea, and the other would agree it was necessary. In that cycle, guilt dissolved. Wrongdoing became shared, and therefore, in their minds, harmless. They also fed off each other's impulses. One brother might begin an act as a joke, a moment of arrogance, but the other would escalate it, pushing the boundary further. Laughter replaced hesitation. What could have ended as a cruel remark often became public humiliation because neither wanted to appear weaker than the other. Their shared power reshaped how others behaved around them. People learned to read the room, to sense when the twins were together, because that was when restraint disappeared completely. Alone, one might show flickers of control. Together, they became something else, louder, bolder, and more dangerous. This unity created an illusion of invincibility. Two voices saying the same thing felt like truth. Two hands acting together felt like law. Over time, the twins stopped seeing themselves as men bound by rules and began seeing themselves as the rules themselves. But shared power carries a hidden flaw. When two people build strength by reinforcing each other's darkness, they also share the consequences when that darkness finally meets resistance. And when the reckoning comes, it does not face one man, but both at once, with nowhere to hide. The enslaved mother had learned long ago how to make herself small. Survival demanded it. She moved carefully, spoke softly, and kept her eyes lowered, not out of submission, but out of necessity. Every day required a balance between endurance and invisibility, because attention from powerful men rarely brought anything but pain. When the twin brothers singled her out, it was not because she had done something wrong. It was because she was there. Her existence, her exhaustion, Her quiet presence offended their sense of control. To them, she was not a person with a past or a family, but a symbol of weakness they could bend without consequence. The humiliation was deliberate and public. They wanted witnesses. Laughter from others, forced, nervous, complicit, only deepened the cruelty. Each moment was designed to strip away dignity, to remind her that even her pain belonged to them. She endured it in silence, not because it hurt less, but because she knew resistance would only make it worse. What made the torment especially cruel was its casual nature. There was no rage, no dramatic outburst, only boredom disguised as authority. The brothers treated her suffering as entertainment, something to fill the empty hours of a day, already overflowing with privilege. That indifference cut deeper than violence. Still, the mother did not break in the way they expected. Her body bore the weight of humiliation, but her mind held on to something they could not see. With every insult, every command, her thoughts drifted elsewhere, to memory, to love, to someone far beyond their reach. Those watching noticed it too. There was something unsettling about how she endured. No pleading, no tears offered for mercy, just a quiet resolve that suggested this moment was not the end of her story. It made some avert their eyes, not from her, but from the brothers. When it was over, the twins walked away believing they had proven their dominance once again. The mother was left behind in the dust, bruised in spirit, but not defeated. What the brothers failed to understand was that humiliation does not always end in submission. Sometimes it becomes a message carried silently forward. Silence surrounded everything that happened next. But it was not empty, it was heavy. The kind of silence built from fear, from people knowing what they had seen and choosing survival over truth. Those who witnessed the humiliation learned instantly what was expected of them: forget, look away, move on. In places ruled by power, silence was the safest language. No one spoke in defense of the enslaved mother, not because they felt nothing, but because feeling too much could be fatal. Eyes dropped. Conversations ended abruptly. The moment passed as if it had never happened, absorbed into the routine cruelty of daily life. This was how injustice survived, quietly, efficiently, without resistance. Even those who felt shame understood the rules. To challenge the twin brothers was to invite ruin. Jobs could disappear. Families could be punished. Accidents could be arranged. Fear trained people to become witnesses without voices, carriers of truth they would never release. The land itself seemed accustomed to this silence. Buildings stood where screams had once echoed. Paths were worn smooth by people who had learned where not to linger. Over time, cruelty blended into the environment, invisible because it was constant. Silence became tradition. The brothers relied on this social quiet more than guards or weapons. They knew that power worked best when others enforced it through obedience. Every unspoken agreement strengthened their rule. Every swallowed word made them larger than life. But silence has limits. It can suppress truth, but it cannot erase consequence. What is buried does not disappear, it waits. The same quiet that protected the twins also carried news in subtle ways. Glances exchanged, doors closed softly, footsteps moving faster than usual. Somewhere beyond the fields and the watching eyes, that silence was already breaking, not with shouting or rebellion, but with movement. And when it finally shattered, It would not come from the crowd, but from a single presence that did not need words at all. Few people knew much about the son, and those who did rarely spoke his name aloud. He lived at the margins, moving between places where notice was scarce and questions were fewer. His size alone made him unforgettable, yet his absence from daily life allowed most to pretend he did not exist. To the powerful, ignoring him was easier than understanding him. From birth, the world had been distant to him. Sound never guided his steps or warned him of danger. Instead, he learned to read the ground, to feel vibrations through his feet, to sense shifts in air and posture. Where others relied on voices, he relied on presence. This made him observant in ways few could match. His deafness shaped his temperament. He was quiet, not from passivity, but from self-control. Words were unnecessary when intent was clear. People often mistook his silence for simplicity, never realizing how carefully he watched, how deeply he understood the emotional weight of a room. The bond with his mother was unspoken yet powerful. They communicated through touch, through expression, through routine. He knew her strength not by what she said, but by what she endured. When something disrupted that rhythm, when her movements changed, when her eyes carried something heavier than exhaustion, he noticed immediately. News did not reach him through conversation. It reached him through tension in the air, through hurried footsteps, through the way others avoided his gaze. The story of what had been done to his mother traveled without sound, carried by fear and guilt. He did not react with rage in the way others expected. There was no shouting, no frantic movement. Instead, he prepared. Each step he took afterward was deliberate, grounded, and calm. Whatever came next would not be an accident. By the time the twins believed the incident had faded into nothing, the sun was already on the move, silent, towering, and unseen by those who felt safest. He carried not vengeance alone, but the weight of every ignored injustice that had led him there. Deafness had never weakened him, it had sharpened him. While others depended on shouted warnings or whispered threats, he learned to trust what could not lie: movement, tension, rhythm. The earth spoke to him through pressure and vibration. A hurried step felt different from a confident one. Fear carried a pattern all its own. Because sound never distracted him, his focus was absolute. Crowded spaces did not overwhelm him. Instead, they revealed themselves like maps. He noticed who shifted away, who stiffened, who tried to appear invisible. Long before danger announced itself to others, he sensed it forming. People often assumed silence meant ignorance. They spoke freely around him, careless with their words, forgetting that understanding does not require hearing. He read lips when he needed to, but more often he read intent. Anger tightened jaws, arrogance lifted chins, guilt avoided eye contact. These signals were louder than voices. His size amplified this awareness. At 7 feet tall, the world reacted to him instinctively. Conversations paused, rooms adjusted. That reaction taught him how power worked, not through noise, but through presence. He learned when to soften himself and when to stand still and let others reveal their fear. With his mother, this heightened awareness became protective instinct. He noticed the smallest change in her posture, the way her hands trembled when they never had before, the delay in her movements that spoke of humiliation carried inward. No explanation was needed. Her pain was clear. Preparation followed understanding. He grounded himself, steadying breath and body, aligning intention with movement. Strength without control was useless. Control without purpose was empty. He carried both. Every step he took afterward was measured, guided by awareness rather than impulse. When he finally entered the space where power believed itself secure, he did not announce himself. He did not need to. His presence disrupted the rhythm immediately, like a sudden weight placed on fragile ground. In that moment, those who had relied on noise and authority understood something too late. True power does not shout. Strength is not always measured in force alone. It is measured in presence, in patience, and in the ability to endure what others cannot. The son understood this deeply. He had grown in silence, learning that true strength was hidden in restraint, in observing before acting, in letting the world reveal itself before moving. Every hardship he faced had forged not anger alone, but a deliberate, focused power. The mother's endurance had taught him that courage was quieter than people imagined. It was not loud protests or desperate fights. It was the steady refusal to be broken. Seeing her survive humiliation without surrender left an imprint on him that no words could convey. Her strength became the blueprint for his own. He did not flaunt what he had. His size and skill were tools, not weapons for ego. Where the twin brothers used wealth to project dominance, he used awareness to command respect. There was a difference between intimidation and authority, and he understood it instinctively. One forced fear. The other invited recognition of power's inevitability. Strength also meant timing. He knew that rushing into confrontation before understanding the situation would be wasteful, even dangerous. He watched, assessed, and moved only when every element was clear. Impulse had no place in the balance of force and intention he carried within him. His silence amplified his strength. People projected assumptions onto him, believing he was unaware or weak because he did not speak. They did not realize that his mind was recording, analyzing, and waiting. Invisibility became an asset, making the moment of revelation all the more decisive. Physical power was only part of the equation. Emotional strength mattered equally. He carried the weight of humiliation inflicted upon his mother, the injustices that had gone unchecked, and the social silence that protected cruelty. That burden gave his movements purpose, gave his presence inevitability, and transformed simple strength into a force of consequence. When the moment came to confront the twin brothers, it was not mere size that commanded attention. It was the culmination of every trial, every lesson, every quiet hour of preparation. True strength, he had learned, is not in striking first. It is in being ready to strike in the exact way the world least expects, with precision, patience, and inevitability. Justice in their world was rarely swift, rarely fair, and rarely seen. Laws existed on paper, but power dictated how, or if, they were enforced. The twin brothers had relied on that for years, believing that money and influence could shield them from consequence. They assumed that cruelty could go unchecked forever, that the scales of justice would always tip in their favor. But the kind of justice that waits in shadows does not rely on courts or statutes. It relies on inevitability. The son's arrival represented a form of justice beyond the law. It was personal, direct, and unpreventable. It did not require witnesses, lawyers, or records. It required only awareness, intent, and action. Unlike the world's formal justice, which can be slow, partial, or corrupted, this justice was immediate. It was measured, deliberate, and terrifying precisely because it could not be negotiated. Witnesses to the unfolding events felt the weight of this justice even before any action took place. The air itself seemed charged with tension, and fear moved faster than footsteps. The twin brothers, who had thrived on the obedience and silence of others, realized too late that the rules they had counted on no longer applied. The balance had shifted, and power could no longer be dictated by wealth alone. Justice came in a way that forced recognition of their wrongdoing. The twins had mocked and humiliated without consequence for so long that they believed the world owed them immunity. The son's presence shattered that assumption. In his silence and immensity, he demanded acknowledgement of their crimes, a reckoning the law had failed to provide. There was a moral clarity to this justice that formal structures often lack. It was not about vengeance alone, it was about restoring balance, about demonstrating that cruelty carries weight, whether measured by the law or by life itself. Each deliberate step, each measured action, reflected a deep understanding that wrongdoing leaves traces that cannot be erased by wealth, status, or intimidation. The twin brothers' shock underscored a painful truth. Justice delayed does not mean justice denied. What they had done, what they had ignored, and what they had assumed would remain hidden, now confronted them. They could no longer rely on silence, complicity, or fear to protect them. The scales had tilted, and the sun had become their measure. By the time the world noticed the outcome, the story had already spread through whispers and fragments. It became a cautionary tale that wealth and cruelty are never absolute shields. True justice may arrive slowly, quietly, and from unexpected places, but when it does, it demands recognition, leaving no room for denial, no escape for those who believe themselves untouchable. History often forgets those who suffer quietly, leaving only fragments for later generations to piece together. Witnesses to injustice are silenced by fear, by shame, or by the simple will to survive. In the case of the twin brothers and the enslaved mother, much of what occurred was deliberately erased from official records. Stories survived only through whispers, oral recollections, and the few who dared to remember what most wanted to forget. The erased witnesses carried truth in silence. They saw cruelty, humiliation, and the slow unfolding of power, but they could not speak without risking their own safety. Their silence was protective, yet it also allowed injustice to persist unchecked. What remained were fragmented memories, hints, and rumors that hinted at a reckoning no law had recorded. Those who did speak were often disbelieved. Tales of a giant, deaf son confronting the twin brothers sounded fantastical, impossible. Few could reconcile the mundane reality of daily life with the sudden, extraordinary arrival of justice. Yet the fragments that survived painted a vivid picture: power challenged, arrogance confronted, and cruelty balanced by inevitability. The surviving accounts emphasized the contrast between appearances and reality. The brothers appeared invincible, wealth shielding them from consequence. But history, even in its incomplete form, shows that invisibility cannot protect wrongdoing indefinitely. The witnesses' memories, though cautious and incomplete, underscore that injustice, however carefully hidden, leaves traces that cannot be fully erased. Silence, in this case, became a form of protection and a form of storytelling. Stories passed down quietly through generations carried moral weight, warning others that cruelty has consequences, even if they are not immediately visible. These stories survived precisely because witnesses chose observation over confrontation, preserving memory when action was impossible. Even when accounts are fragmented, the impact of erased witnesses remains clear. They remind us that history is not only written by those in power, but also shaped by those who observe, endure, and remember. Their silence becomes testimony, their restraint a lens through which later generations understand the full measure of events. Ultimately, the story of the twin brothers, the enslaved mother, and her towering son survives not because of law or record, but because witnesses, though erased and silent, kept fragments alive. Their memories allowed truth to persist, proving that even in the face of fear, cruelty leaves marks, and justice, though delayed, finds a way to manifest. No matter how much power someone holds, history has a way of catching up with them. The twin brothers had long believed themselves untouchable, shielded by wealth, status, and fear. Their cruelty toward the enslaved mother was just another example of how they assumed the world would bend to their will. But power, no matter how absolute it seems, is never permanent. It is fragile, contingent, and subject to forces beyond control. For years, the brothers operated with impunity. Their wealth insulated them from social norms, and their influence silenced anyone who might challenge them. They laughed at the idea of consequence because they had never faced one. Each act of cruelty only reinforced their arrogance, making them blind to the fact that every action leaves a mark. History records that no arrogance goes untested. Reckoning often arrives in forms unexpected. In this story, it was not the law, nor neighbors, nor formal justice that confronted the twins, but the son of the woman they had humiliated. His arrival was sudden, precise, and impossible to ignore. The power they had relied on to protect themselves could not shield them from this form of justice. This moment proved that consequences often come from sources we cannot anticipate. The inevitability of reckoning is tied to patience. Those who endure injustice, like the mother and her son, may seem powerless at first, but their resilience carries weight over time. A life spent observing, preparing, and waiting can culminate in a single act that shifts the balance. History is full of examples where the seemingly powerless hold the latent ability to challenge the mighty. Power often lulls people into complacency. The brothers assumed that wealth equaled security, that fear equaled control, and that silence equaled consent. They did not account for moral, emotional, or natural forces that operate outside of their authority. This overconfidence is precisely what makes reckoning inevitable. It thrives where arrogance blinds foresight. Even after the moment of confrontation, the lesson of inevitability lingers. Actions left unchecked will echo beyond the immediate circumstances. The brothers may have survived the initial shock, but their reputation, control, and sense of security were permanently altered. Consequences, once set in motion, do not require continuous enforcement. They unfold naturally over time. Ultimately, the inevitability of reckoning is a truth that transcends this single story. It reminds us that no one, however rich or cruel, can escape the consequences of their actions forever. Time, resilience, and justice, whether formal or personal, will always find a way to restore balance. Even when the world appears indifferent, endurance is often overlooked as a form of power because it does not show immediately. To most, resistance looks like action, confrontation, or rebellion, but there is a quieter, more potent strength in simply surviving. The enslaved mother endured humiliation, cruelty, and relentless oppression, yet she continued to live, work, and preserve her spirit. Each day she survived, she accumulated power in ways her tormentors could not measure. Survival under cruelty is not passive. It requires vigilance, patience, and strategy. Every moment of restraint is calculated, deciding when to speak, when to obey, when to hide, and when to assert oneself. In doing so, endurance transforms suffering into a silent assertion of control. Even when her body bore scars of torment, her mind remained free to plan, observe, and preserve the seeds of eventual justice. Endurance challenges the illusion of dominance. The twin brothers may have believed their power was absolute because they inflicted pain without immediate consequence. But the mother's survival quietly contradicted their belief. Each day she endured became a testament that cruelty does not guarantee submission. In surviving, she resisted, not through violence, but through the refusal to be broken entirely. This silent resistance becomes especially potent when combined with preparation. By enduring, the mother maintained awareness of her surroundings, understanding her oppressor's habits, weaknesses, and patterns. Her endurance allowed her to protect her son and prepare him for the day when the scales of power could shift. In this way, survival carries both defensive and strategic force. Endurance also sends a subtle, often unrecognized message to others. Observers who notice that cruelty has not crushed someone may begin to question the power of the oppressors. Fear and intimidation rely on immediate compliance. When that compliance is delayed, weakened, or resisted through survival, the oppressor's authority begins to erode, often in ways they cannot perceive. The son's eventual arrival demonstrates the culmination of endurance as resistance. His existence, trained by years of observation and survival alongside his mother, became a living testament to the power she silently nurtured. Her suffering and persistence did not produce immediate revenge, but it prepared the conditions for a confrontation that even the twin brothers could not escape. Ultimately, endurance proves that resistance is not always loud, dramatic, or immediate. Surviving cruelty quietly, day after day, preserves life, knowledge, and strength. It transforms vulnerability into latent power, creating the conditions for justice or change to emerge when the moment is right. In surviving, the oppressed claim a form of victory that may remain invisible until it is fully realized. Memory is a fragile yet powerful weapon against forgetting. In the case of the twin brothers and the enslaved mother, official records were scarce, deliberately altered, or erased entirely. The law, history books, and public accounts often ignored the suffering of those without status. Yet memory passed quietly from one witness to another, sometimes whispered in secret, became the vessel that carried truth forward. Even those forced into silence played a crucial role in preserving history. Fear kept them from speaking openly, but it could not erase what they had seen. Their recollections, fragmented and careful, became a living testimony. Each remembered detail, each cautious retelling, ensured that the reality of cruelty and injustice survived, even when those in power tried to bury it. Untold stories hold a unique weight. They are not written in grand proclamations or recorded in official annals, but they carry authenticity. The stories of the mother, her endurance, and her son's eventual reckoning lived on through subtle transmission, through whispered accounts, private reflections, and family memory. These narratives preserve lessons and moral truths that formal history often ignores. Memory as preservation also restores agency to those denied it. The mother and her son may have had little control over law or society, but their lived experiences remained real, undeniable, and impactful. Witnesses' memories act as extensions of that agency, validating the existence of injustice and ensuring that the truth cannot be erased entirely. Even decades later, these preserved memories influence how events are understood. They shape stories that caution, educate, and reveal the dynamics of power and oppression. The details carried forward, though incomplete, allow generations to reconstruct what occurred, honoring the resilience of those who survived and the consequences faced by the oppressors. Erased witnesses, by choosing remembrance over compliance, become unintentional historians. They record more than events. They record context, emotion, and consequence. Their memory bridges the gap between what was hidden and what future generations need to know. Without them, acts of cruelty risk vanishing entirely, leaving only the false comfort of official silence. Ultimately, memory ensures that injustice, no matter how deeply buried, cannot vanish completely. The mother's suffering, the son's rise, and the fall of the twin brothers survive because human memory refuses to be silenced. Erased witnesses and untold stories form a living archive, proving that even when history forgets, truth endures in those who remember.